Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, what photography means to them, and to dig a little deeper into the way they think about their photography. Zac Henderson has been shooting since he was 15, starting on his mother's film camera. These days, he and his wife live and travel full-time in a motorhome across the US, and that nomadic life feeds directly into his work. Zac's photography is rooted in astrophysics, geological time, and the kind of perspective shifts that come from thinking seriously about humanity's place in the cosmos. That draws him to deserts, rock formations, and volcanic landscapes, places that feel like they could exist on another planet entirely. In this week's episode, Zac talks about his abstract dark matter series using magnets and iron filings, how recent high-quality space imagery has influenced his thinking, and his experiments with full-spectrum and infrared photography. He's also honest about the challenge of making work that communicates clearly in an era of AI-generated imagery. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Zac. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. Thank you for agreeing to be on the show. It's great to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you. Why don't we start with who is Zac Henderson and why does he do landscape photography? What is it that drew you to landscape photography in the first place?
Yeah. So when I was 15, I started making images with my mom's film camera. And for whatever reason, it was something that I latched onto and it never got let go of. I was looking for something to kind of sink my teeth into as a teenager, and that took. And so I started learning everything I could. I went to school for photography after that. But while I was in school, I didn't know what I wanted to photograph, really. I thought I would be into portraiture. I took a lot of portraits. But I didn't have much of a direction. And then in my 20s, I was working as a digitech and as a technical support for medium format camera systems and training others how to use medium format systems for a dealership. And I kind of realized, I think what I'm interested in is the landscape, and not just the landscape, but the landscape as it relates to, it's going to sound kind of crazy, but the landscape as it relates to science, the landscape as it relates to a sort of a universal idea of nature and the landscape. I started reading about astrophysics, and it's just totally random, but when I was in my 20s, I got really interested in things like black holes and dark matter and things that we really don't have any business knowing about as people, as humans. And I just voraciously read about it, consumed it, and I have no background in that kind of science, but as a layperson, I just couldn't get enough of it. And so I wanted to find some way to introduce that into my photography. Obviously, I can't photograph dark matter. You can't, unless you're an astrophotographer. Anyway, that's true. But I was so inspired by that. I was so interested in those things that I wanted to represent that some way and have some relationship to it. And so I started thinking about the landscape as a force of nature, as a part of nature that's a little bit more than, the flowers and the trees and the birds and the bees that people often think about when they hear the word nature. When I think about the landscape, I think about it as a rocky body that there are others of in our solar system and are billions more of in the universe. And ours is a small representation of what those others are. If you think about, and I got really interested in, the images that were being beamed back from Mars rovers, Curiosity, and before that, and the images that they would send back of these Martian landscapes, rocks in this desert landscape, and these dunes, and mountains and volcanoes, and these are things that are not dissimilar from what we have.
Sure.
So many of them look like they're in the American West, or they look like they're in the American West, or the Australian outback, or in parts of the Middle East. And, there are places that look not that different. And I became really interested in that. And so I started looking at the landscape like it was a representation of anywhere in the universe, anywhere, any other rocky body. And I know that sounds kind of out there, but that's how I think about it. And so once I started thinking about the landscape in those terms, it steered how I made my images aesthetically. I think it kind of steered my subject matter quite a lot. And so now it's kind of, for better or for worse, that's what I'm thinking about when I'm out there.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating way of looking at the natural world and the world itself in terms of not just that very local, intimate, here's a patch of rocks or whatever, but that sort of more global and even, as you said, more solar system, more universal viewpoint. I think that's an absolutely fascinating way of looking at the world. How do you think, you talked a little bit there about how that has started to influence what starting to shoot or what you are shooting and how you're bringing your images together. How is that happening for you with that sort of mindset?
Yeah. So first off, I mentioned images being back from Mars and being inspired by that, the recognition that these desert landscapes are very similar to the desert landscapes we have here. And so that's kind of where my brain goes first, is desert environments, things that are devoid of life, or very little plant life, rocks that are representative of geological time, that have been here for millennia, or longer. And so that's what initially, so as a general broad stroke, that's kind of where I started from. And then from that, you become interested in things like geomorphology and volcanism and things that the Earth is doing that is on a scale that we just can't comprehend, because we exist for around 90 years if we're lucky, and we just have no concept of geological time. And these things go hand in hand with what we were talking about a minute ago, with thinking about, rocky bodies in the solar system and other planets that are not too dissimilar from our own. And they all have these mechanisms, and they're, obviously disparate. They can be very different, but so many of them are so similar. And I find that fascinating. And so rock formations in particular, and volcanism and volcanoes specifically, and igneous rocks, and these are the kinds of things that I'm quite drawn to. And it's fortunate because they can be quite dynamic, particularly volcanism and rocks that have been formed in really odd and strange ways. They can be quite dynamic and quite interesting. And I try my best to find those and then approach them in a way that I haven't seen before, and I think it's helpful to approach it from that angle rather than trying to duplicate or make an attractive image of something that's interesting. If you can approach it, I try to approach it from a position of thinking something is interesting for a particular reason and trying to put blinders on and getting the rest out of my mind. If I can just, what do I like about this? Why do I find this interesting more than anything else? And then just leaning into that as best I can.
Yeah.
That's a long answer.
Yeah, no, but it's a great answer, because it does give insight into some of that thinking behind what you're doing when you're out there. I guess I'm really interested there in what was the first time that really struck you. There's usually a point in most photographers' lives where they sort of switch from purely documentary style photography, where you're recording an event or a moment in a trip or whatever it is that you happen to be wandering around the world with your camera with. And at some point you go, this is actually art. What I'm doing, I'm creating something from what I'm seeing and trying to convey an emotion or a feeling with it. And I'm just interested in where that sort of moment happened for you.
Well, so ironically, it didn't happen in the landscape. So
Okay.
I think it was 2017. So like I mentioned before, I was reading about astrophysics and all these things and getting kind of desperate in terms of wanting to have some relationship to these things that I didn't really know about, but, finding myself very interested in. And dark matter specifically was something that I thought it was just fascinating, is this thing that we don't have any, it doesn't exist on the electromagnetic spectrum. We can't see it, but its effects are profound, and it keeps galaxies from flinging apart into space. We know it's there, but we can't see it. And I'm just thinking in my head in my 20s, not knowing anything else except reading those things and just thinking that's amazing. That's fascinating. How can I have some relationship to that? And so I started thinking about, well, what if I were to use an abstract idea to make a photograph of that? To not make an image that's like a representation or an illustration, but something that just was born out of that fascination, that was born out of that interest. And so I don't remember how I landed on magnets, but I bought these little ceramic magnets from the hardware store, and I got some iron filings from I ordered them offline, and I suspended the magnets with some fishing line and exposed them to the iron filings to those ceramic magnets, and I just started playing and making some images, making some images. They look kind of weird, but they started to come into these three-dimensional sculptures, right? So, and it got really interesting. It started to get, I was using a macro lens to get very close, and the detail of the iron filings and those individual grains. I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. We're talking about particle physics when we're talking about dark matter generally, and we're trying to figure out what kind of particles make up this kind of matter. And that's sort of a nod, again, not an illustration of, but a nod to particles and particle physics. What if the magnets could use it? You kind of think about the magnets being like the regular matter that you and I are made up of, that are influenced by the dark matter particles. And again, it's pretty out there, but it was just, it's again, not an illustration of, but something inspired by this thing. And so made this set of images, titled it Dark Matter, and it got a little bit of attention. And I've made since 3 iterations of Dark Matter. Okay. And so it's a series that's expanded. But to answer your question, how that relates to the landscape, I think that was the first time where I realized that I could make something out of my interest, use photography to do that, and have it be this organic thing that comes out of that interest, and that can find a life in a visual sense. And so I'm not a studio photographer. I was just kind of a one-off in a way. And I'm kind of taking that idea and putting that in the landscape now. Yeah. And I'm thinking about the landscape and landforms in a similar way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense indeed. I'm interested in your reaction with hopefully you've seen the shots coming back from the Artemis 2 mission. And I'm interested in sort of how you're reacting to that, given your interest in astrophysics and so forth, when you're seeing that. You look to me probably just a little bit too young to have seen the Apollo missions. I grew up flicking through the National Geographics in 1968, 69, 70, 71 and so forth, looking at those images from Apollo and just having my tiny little mind blown at the time. I was, 4, 5, 6 years old, but, I didn't need to read the stories. I was flicking through the pages, looking at those images and just having my mind blown. What does it mean to you to sort of see some of those images coming back from Artemis?
Oh yeah, no, it's been, I don't think anyone was ready for the quality of images that these astronauts were going to come back with. They've been gorgeous, and not just like the images of the Earth that, well, it sounds so, it sounds so jaded. Like, we've seen the globe before.
That's it.
We've seen the Earth rise. Like, come on, show me something new. But oh my God, they have. And like, not, the Earth set image is gorgeous, and the eclipse image is stunning, but also just like the images that are coming back of the astronauts looking out the cupola, I guess.
Yeah, that human experience of that.
Yes. And so that's been stunning. That's been beautiful. And there's one image in particular, I think it was shown on a GoPro, and it's on the, it's on the exterior of the vehicle. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a shot that includes the exterior of the vehicle and the eclipsed moon.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the most sci-fi image I've ever seen in my entire life that is also 100% real. It is aesthetically beautiful. It looks like it's a still from a movie.
Yeah. Stanley Kubrick couldn't have done it better. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was like, I reposted that on my Instagram story, and then I put some text just before, and like, this is too much. It just couldn't handle that image. And when I first saw it, I was like, well, who made this? Like, this isn't something that they sent back. And oh my God. So yeah, I've been floored. I've loved to see these, and it's a needed distraction, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mildly.
Yeah. I guess one of the interesting things that I've heard about the mission is that the astronauts themselves actually went and did photography training so that they understood how to use the gear that they were using. I think it was Nikon gave them a load of bodies and lenses to play around with. They've also got iPhones and whatever up there. So it was just interesting that they sort of said, okay, well, we know we're going to need to record this stuff, so we'd better be prepared. And I think that shows in the compositions, in the way that the images have actually been shot, using high ISO to get those eclipse shots. There's an eclipse shot of the Earth where you're actually looking at the dark side of the Earth with the sun completely hidden behind it, and just that little glowing rim on one side. And, yeah, there's a lot of ISO noise in there, but so what? It's just such a stunning image. And I don't think back in 68, 69, that could have been replicated, because with film at the time and the capabilities of the bodies that they had, they were fantastic, but I just don't think you could have done that because you wouldn't have had enough light to play with.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to the ability of these individuals to soak up training and retain information in such a useful way. I mean, that's all they've been doing for years, is to prepare for this, is just learn how to do things, learn how to do them well. And you can, you're totally right. Like, the training that they received, not just technically, but also just like, they've been looking at images, obviously. They've been looking at photography, and they know what images are powerful. And they've been able to make the most of it, certainly. So I'm certainly grateful for that. And I think everyone is. It's been a blast to see those images.
Yeah. Let's talk about your current journeys back here on Earth. For those watching the video, you can obviously see that Zac is sitting in his motorhome. What's prompted you to start that nomadic life and basically travel around the US and North America taking images?
Yeah, so my wife and I started doing this several years ago, and we've been doing it off and on since, I think, 2017, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that, for a landscape photographer, it's just like, that's just, you can't get better than that, right? You can be somewhere, you can wait for the light, you're not in a rush.
If I need to stay another day, I'll stay another day.
I'll stay another week, maybe. There are limitations. We have to, if we don't technically have any air conditioning, and so it's not like we can be in the middle of the desert and the middle of the summer and feel like we're living our best life. But we both love the outdoors. My wife and I, we've been married since 2012, and so we both know that we love the outdoors. And my wife's an illustrator and a children's book author, and is a photographer and someone that works in the photo industry. She can work from anywhere. I can work either from anywhere or travel for work anyway. So it allows us to do this thing, which we're really grateful that we get to do. But I mean, we love being outside. We love being in nature. And we realized pretty early on that we didn't need a lot of space. And so, let's combine these things and, be on the road full time. We started doing this again recently. We started in October of last year. Okay. We had moved back to our home state of Alabama. We'd been around family for about 4 years, and we got the itch again. And so, we sold our home and are back on the road as of October last year. So it feels good to be back on the road. Truly, always does. And it's not always fun. It's not always glamorous, but we are very grateful for it and that we're able to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Talking about the glamorous versus the non-glamorous, what are some memorable moments that you've had in this most recent trip?
In this most recent trip, so we've in October, we went through some pretty cold temperatures. We went up to New York in approaching winter, and we're from the South, the southeastern U.S., and so we're used to fairly warm weather. And so cold weather for us, we used to be able to tolerate pretty easily, but this time around we're still building our tolerance back up for that. And we hadn't yet had our heater installed in this particular van, and so we were just kind of out there in the middle of the night in the low 30s, high 20s Fahrenheit, and it's a little chilly, but nothing crazy memorable really. We spent a lot of January in Florida, so we kind of tend to snowbird in the extremes of the seasons, and so in the winter we go south, and so we've spent a lot of time visiting springs in Florida, and making some images of the artesian springs that are bubbling up out of the ground in that part of the country, which is really fascinating. So that's been something that we've been able to do. There's 32 first magnitude springs in Florida, and we're able to travel and visit, I think, close to 15 of them. And so we're saving some for later for future years, but that was something that we were able to do this winter. That was pretty special that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Nice. Is there anywhere that you just sort of keep circling and you haven't quite grasped yet?
Oh, you mean like actually visited yet?
Yeah.
So we've intended to go to Alaska a few years, and for whatever reason have had to abandon those plans. This year we're also looking at Alaska in the summer, and so we're doing everything we can to kind of make that happen. The thing that's kind of making that difficult, as you might imagine, are of course gas prices. And so Alaskan gas prices on a good day are quite expensive, and so now with the way things are now, it's a bit crazy. So we're hoping things come down, obviously for a lot of reasons. We want that to happen, but that's one of them. So that's something that we're looking at. Up to now, we hadn't really done much exploring on the East Coast on the eastern side of our country. We have, in the past, we've spent most of our time out west. And so, I mean, there's a lot of obvious reasons for that. Mountains, there's so many different, there's such a diversity of ecosystems out west. You can be within 30 minutes, you can be in an alpine forest. Yeah. And then 30 minutes later, you're in red desert. And we love that ability, and not least of which, so that we can escape the heat of the desert, go up in elevation and cool off. So we spend a lot of our time like in Utah, Arizona, Nevada, Idaho. And ironically, we haven't spent that much time in California, but we've spent a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest. But on the East Coast, we haven't really done much yet, aside from Florida most recently, and our trip up to New York. We were aiming at Maine, but we were a little late in getting going, and without a heater, we didn't want to hit Maine in November.
I get that.
It would have been possible. We would have survived, but it wouldn't have been the most comfortable thing in the world. So again, some things you just have to let wait until later.
Sure. I guess that requires a reasonable amount of planning, then, not just weather and climate and so forth, but where can you get gas? Where can you get water and other supplies? I know when I've used our motorhome, that's one of the main things. It's okay. How much water can I carry? How many days have I got? Where am I going to get it again if I'm going to go somewhere that's really remote? How do you go about your planning for your vehicular travels?
It's constant. It's not something we can just forget about. No. Everything revolves around your resources that you have available. So for us, it's about where, if it's water tends to be the biggest thing. We can charge our batteries off of solar. We can charge off of the alternator while driving. We have a large enough battery bank that power really is not our problem, generally speaking. We'll run out occasionally, but generally speaking, power is not the issue, but water is always the problem. And so sometimes you can find like gas stations, like fuel stations will have fresh water. You find some campgrounds, if there are some available in the area, you can stop in, get some water, and then keep going. But we've also just filtered creek water. If we're somewhere for a long period of time, and we don't, we're doing great work where we are. We love our camping spot, but we don't want to leave. And if there's water nearby, like we'll filter that water, and have done that several times. And it's a great way that allows you to stay out. Fuel, of course, and especially in Alaska, fuel's a thing. Not everywhere has. Fuel stations aren't always open. Depending on the part of the year, and they may be out of fuel. And so not having gone yet, these are things that have come up in my research. Everything I've read says that as you go up there and while you're up there, never pass up an opportunity to fill up.
Always top off the tanks. Yeah.
Always. Yeah. And so now, the other thing that's kind of come up is like, all right, well, where can we find fuel that's affordable and that isn't getting gouged price wise? And that's been more of a challenge lately. And so
I don't think there's anywhere in the world where that's,
that's just kind of the way it is, right?
It's funny. I know, recently there's been some social media posts about Americans complaining about their gas prices and whatever, and we kind of look at it and go, probably about 2/3 to twice as much.
We are a little spoiled. Try to be aware of that.
So stop your whinging. But it is a challenge. It's one of the reasons why I'm not doing this from my van. We were actually planning to go away through end of March, beginning of April, and it was kind of like things started happening, and it was, well, I really don't want to spend that amount of money just to go out and take some photos. It just becomes, I think, a little bit unviable. We're not doing it full time. We're doing it on reasonably short trips at the moment, but we're planning to do the trip across the Nullarbor and go across to Western Australia from Sydney. Which is, I think, about it's like New York to LA sort of distances.
Right.
You're talking about 4 or 5 days minimum. That's just if you're just driving. That's without actually stopping and taking photos. You're probably talking, for me, more like 12 to 15 days.
Even then, that's kind of fast.
Exactly.
That's a great trip, though. That's fast. That's really exciting.
Absolutely. But again, I don't think I'll be doing that until prices come down a little bit, because it's when you start doing the calculations and what that would cost, it's just mind boggling. Anyway, but um, I'm keen to understand, with that planning, are you planning around locations to shoot? Are you planning around just being in a place for certain times a year? What are the things that are sort of driving it? And then as you sort of start that planning, are you thinking about the sorts of locations that you're shooting? And are you thinking about, okay, well, I want to be here for autumn because the leaves are going to be turning about that week, and that's where I want to be for that kind of shot? What sort of planning are you doing around your shooting and the traveling itself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so it really depends on what our projects look like at any given time. If I have to be anywhere for for work, we do a lot of planning around that.
Mm-hmm.
And so either that means traveling to the job or traveling to an area that has a large enough airport where I can fly. Other times it is heavily dependent on weather. Either, we're kind of taking advantage of where we are so that we're at a reasonable temperature. So what's around the area that we know we're going to be in. And then other times we're headed specifically to a spot to photograph, and we're going to hit this area as hard as we can and camp in this area as much as we can. Because sometimes those two things line up every now and then, especially out west. In the Western U.S., these places that I enjoy photographing that make up most of my subject matter also have camping very nearby. They're on public lands or adjacent to public lands, and so that makes access for us very easy, and so it's very attractive. And so sometimes it's about that. Other times my wife has to do a lot of work, and she's on a deadline. And so we'll say, all right, well, if we're going to be in this, we have to be basically stationary so that she can focus for a given period of time. Let's say it's 2-3 weeks. Well, where do we want to spend 2 or 3 weeks? Sure. Sometimes that's in an area that allows me to photograph a lot of things that I'm interested in. And sometimes it's about amenities. And so to answer your question, really, it's all over the place. It just kind of, we do a lot of planning, but we also really fly by the seat of our pants at the same time.
Yeah. I find that dichotomy interesting, because I'm very much the same when we go on a trip. I kind of go, yeah, well, I want to be here, I want to be there, but the time I spend in each of those places is going to be very variable, and the actual locations of shooting can change day to day depending on wind, weather, etc. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, there was a time a few years ago where we were in Death Valley not in Death Valley, but right outside of Death Valley for, I think it was 2 weeks. And the purpose of us being there was to photograph. And we did nothing but drive into the park, make photographs all day, come back, maybe take a day to recover and review and edit, or another day just going straight out and exploring and then coming back. And so there are definitely those times where we have a spot on a map circled. We say we're going to be here and we're going to photograph this as much as we can for as long as we can before we have to move or before the weather kicks us out. And so generally speaking, it is kind of, what's coming at us and how can we adapt and take most advantage of that. But every now and then we can really focus in and go somewhere specifically for the images.
Sure. You mentioned projects, and I'm interested in how people structure projects. Obviously, you get things from clients that say, you got to be here, you got to do this is what I'm after. I'm not kind of talking about that. This is more for your own personal projects. Do you structure those? Do you think about those in terms of, okay, well, these are the kind of shots that I want to include in this portfolio or body of work that you're creating for yourself? how do you go about that sort of planning of those project pieces?
It depends on the project, which is such a boring answer, but it does. So, as an example, this past project that I just finished, this body of work that I was just finishing up and released not long ago, spring water, again, about these artesian springs in Florida and all of the time that we spent there photographing these wells that are producing up to like 500 million gallons of fresh water every single day, which is out of a aquifer that has over 1 trillion gallons, and it's just this geological wonder that this thing even exists. And so for water to be boiling out of it, interesting stuff. That's what caught my attention while we were in Florida. Going back to the planning, we needed to be in the Southeast for winter, also for some family reasons, and so we wanted to stay nearby Alabama. And I was like, well, what can I photograph in Florida? That was what caught my eye. So springs, that's what we really just kind of honed in on. And so with that, when I realized that was what I was most interested in, I then started making images for that project. I knew there was going to be a project, maybe around 20 images, and I wasn't exactly sure when I first started what types of images I wanted. I wanted to make images of the spring and of the surrounding environment, but also some abstractions. So I was open to a lot of things, but I knew that was the subject matter that I was after.
Right.
In other projects, so Universal Desert being one, as an example, that was a series of black and white images photographed in the desert over the course of 5 years. And at the time, I didn't know I was making photographs for that project. I was just making photographs in the desert that I knew that I just needed to make for one reason or another. I didn't know they didn't have a life yet. I didn't know what their purpose was going to be, but I knew that, they had to get made. And then after the fact, I realized that they had this relationship and that they went together in a way. And so started thinking about sequencing, and then it kind of organically forms that way. And so I think those are kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, but I certainly exist on both sides and in the middle.
Yeah.
In terms of finding, coming up with those kinds of projects.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating, those organic projects where you don't know it's a project when you first start. And I've done several of those sorts of things where it's not until you've actually been doing it, maybe even 3 or 4 years. In my case, one project that I've done, it was, okay, here's what this theme is that I can follow between image one that was taken 4 years ago and the one that I took yesterday. And now I'm starting to sort of wrap it up in my own head. What you end up then doing with it is another set of problems to solve. Is this an exhibition? Is it a book? Is it what actually is it? And
what's funny, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say, for me, those sorts of questions that you go through when you start to realize, okay, there is this theme, there is this thread that runs through all of these images. And this is what I'm trying to communicate with that, even though when you started, 3 or 4 years ago, you didn't know.
Right. What's funny to me also is that sometimes I'll want there to be a relationship between them.
Yeah.
That's the most frustrating. Is like, I want this image to go together with this one and this other set, but they just don't. They just can't see anything that will connect them, and that can be frustrating. But it happens anyway. So sometimes it's like screaming at you that they go together, or sometimes they don't reveal themselves until much later, and then other times the images want nothing to do with each other.
Yeah. As I say, I just find fascinating the thought processes that photographers go through in working that out. When you're doing something like an exhibition or a book, the other piece of the puzzle is the final selection. because as you say, you know, some of the images don't want to go together, and it comes down to things like pairing. If it's a book, for example, you know, the one on page 3 and the one on page 4 have to kind of complement one another in some way. They can be completely different genres even, but there has to be a relationship between the two when you're looking at that. If you're putting them on a wall in an exhibition, image 1, image 2, image 3, there has to be, again, that connection. And I'm really keen to sort of explore with you how you sort of think about that process of both pairing, but also the final selection where you go, okay, well, I've got, let's say it's an exhibition and I've got, you know, 15 images. I really only need 12 because those 3 kind of, I get to image 12 and I've got 3 sort of standouts that just don't fit anywhere in that list. Or, you know, you kind of get where I'm going with this.
Yeah, it's difficult for me because I will get locked in on an image that I really feel like needs to be in a set and in the final, and I bounce everything off of my wife, at least on the last piece, generally before publishing or before sending something out. And sometimes, you know, she'll say that, you know, I'm not sure about this one, and that was one that I was most attracted to. Or if I go to a portfolio review and I've got a set of images, and my very favorite image, the one that I imagine is the centerpiece that every other image in this set orbits around. And then that's the one that the reviewer says, actually, this is my least favorite. First of all, that's a hit to your confidence.
Well, they're all your babies, aren't they? You know?
Yeah, well, they are, right. And so I find it very difficult, as everyone does, you know, in that process when you've got something. But that's why I think external, I think you have to have, and I'm trying to hear myself say this so that I may in the future take the advice that this version of myself is vocalizing, is to let other people provide feedback and bounce those ideas off, because you can get in your own head so much. You get so locked into something that isn't serving the rest of the body of work. Yeah. And that can bring the whole thing down. And that can bring the whole project down. And so, yeah, that's hard to do, but and at other times I feel like if the entire body of work is made around this one image, there's also a time where you have to be like, look, this is it. Everyone in a room full of people that says this image is trash, you might have to say at a certain point, like, no, this is the cornerstone, and it exists one way or the other in relation to these other images, for better or for worse. And, you know, sometimes you do have to make that call, but, you know, highly dependent on the situation, highly dependent on the project, all of that, of course, is true.
Really?
But every now and then, though, I feel like I'm keeping this no matter what.
Yeah. The thing is that it does come down to, it's there because I want it to be, or I'm going to listen to what you're saying and say, oh, well, I am going to pull it out because I'm not strongly wedded to it enough to say it has to be there.
And it also, you know, you're so close to the work, you're so close to the images and the thought that you had and the feeling that you had when you made that image, that might, and likely doesn't, come across to other people. And so when they see a surrounding set of images that are saying this thing, and you, in your mind, were thinking that thing when you made this image, but for whatever reason, that's not being communicated in the same way as these others, those are times when you really have to listen to those people that are telling you something else. And so, yeah, being close to the work is important. I mean, it's
vital.
To be. I mean, it's everything, right? But at the same time, it can be a hindrance when it comes time to step back and see it as a whole. That can be difficult to do sometimes.
Yeah. How much do you feel that you've been successful in communicating what it is that you're trying to communicate with some of your collections of images? obviously some are going to be better than others at communicating that idea. But I guess overall, how successful do you feel you've been?
I, I have a really difficult relationship with my work sometimes. I will be in a really bad place occasionally and not want to look at anything I've ever photographed. And I just can't look at it. And I just don't. I'm like, this isn't saying anything. This is not, this is what I want it to be. This is, for whatever reason, maybe I just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I don't know, whatever. And sometimes I wonder, I'm coming at it from this really arbitrary position. Some of it doesn't look anything like other landscape images that I see get celebrated. And so I'm like, and it may not have, if an image goes on Instagram or something and I don't see, a big response from that, then, or any response sometimes, which is first, then, I'll have a hard time with that. And I'm trying to get better at it. But then usually after some time, I, think about it, take a step back, look at the work again. And every single time I look at the work and say, I like this. This is representative of what I want to say and what I want to do. How successful is that to other people? I think it's successful for me. I see the work and it can always be improved by leaps and bounds. And I hope that it won't ever stop. It will always need to be improved. But I feel like for me, I'm seeing it and I think the work is saying what I want it to say. For other people, I wonder and worry about sometimes whether it's getting the message is coming across, or a message at all is coming across that isn't just here's a rock, okay, so what? But the feedback that I do get, again, I don't get much. I don't have a following, but the feedback I do get does tend to be positive, and it does tend to be valenced in a way that leads me to believe that is coming across well, that there is an otherworldliness to the images. And, that is an aesthetic that I'm trying to put forward, but it's not the entirety of what I'm getting at, but it's definitely, that leads me to believe that when people use that word or words that are similar to it, they're like, okay, well, that sounds like we're on the path. We're in the ballpark that we want to be in. And then I think that's a jumping off point that people can take and assign meaning on their own. But if there's if I'm photographing the landscape and it doesn't feel different, and if it doesn't feel interesting in a way that is, if it feels the same, or if it feels like something that's out your window, that I think for me and what I'm trying to do would be a version of failure. But if the reaction that people are telling me that this is something that that is interesting, or that is again, using that word otherworldly, if that's how it's being described, then I think we're on our way, and it's at least not a complete failure. Some images are complete failures. I have a lot of those. But all of that to say, I think it's semi-successful in doing so, but it always depends, and it's always you live and die by the image, and some images don't get there.
Yeah. I think particularly social media is always problematic for getting feedback. It's not the best medium at the moment for doing that sort of thing, because if you're really lucky, you'll get a comment at all. The part for me is always the challenge of getting something meaningful back from somebody to say, hey, this actually made me feel something. And you just don't get that a lot on social media, unfortunately. Apart from the odd person that comes back and says, this is a pile of crap, why did you even shoot it?
I think I've gotten a comment before that someone said some images don't need to be taken. I think about that every now and then, like, is this an image that needs to be taken?
Well, for me, it's usually one of the waterfalls that I've done, and it's another shot of a waterfall. Just what the
Well,
world.
I mean, it's in terms of feedback, and in terms of like, because it can be really valuable. For me, I mentioned portfolio reviews earlier. That's something that we have, and I'm sure. Actually, I'm not familiar with any in Australia. Do you guys have portfolio reviews that you're aware of? Or
There are places where you can get that done, and there are people that will do portfolio reviews privately if you pay to get it done. But I'm also in touch with a couple of photographers that there's one. I'm sorry, my poor old brain has forgotten his name, but he's basically got a online space where you can actually post images and get reviews. And in the past, I've been part of there was I think the Australian Photography Forum or something, back in the old bulletin board sort of style forum days of the internet, where you could post images and get critiques. Which I personally found invaluable in those days. We're talking sort of 2015, 16, 17, in those sorts of times. And in terms of developing both the ability to accept and understand critique, but also to give critique, I think it's really, really important to learn how to give it in a way that is not just, oh, well, it's a pile of crap, why did you even take it?
100%.
I mean, there are some images you look at and you go, it's not saying anything.
Yeah, that actually, I went to school for photography, and I think that actually is the thing that I learned that's been most valuable, is learning in critique, in class, identifying what in an image is working and what isn't, and then articulating that in a way that, if you like this or don't like that or whatever, you have to expand, and the professors would push you, like, what don't you like about that?
Yeah.
What about this specific thing? Continue.
Yes.
Keep going. Like, they will not let you stop talking until you've made a point that is, has coherence, and you find what you meant when you started saying those things. This is a really valuable thing. And in terms of portfolio reviews, so in here, and I know that there are a lot out there internationally. I'm less familiar with the international ones, of course. I'm most familiar with the portfolio reviews that are in the States, but like these festivals like Palm Springs Photo Festival, Photo NOLA, at Review Santa Fe, there are these large groups that you can go to that are visited by industry leaders that are, they're hiring photographers, or they're gallery owners, or they're publicists, or they're they're working in imprint, or there are a lot of these kinds of industry professionals coming in looking at work. And sometimes it's to look for people to work with. Other times it's just to provide feedback for the photographer. But I found those to be invaluable in finding, like, in recognizing, like, you might go to this event and there's, you have 12 people look at 12 professionals look at your body of work and look at your portfolio that you brought and give you very real and very honest feedback.
Yeah.
And sometimes like I feel like in some critique spaces, you might say, oh, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're who are they?
Yeah.
Well, this person has a pedigree. They work for a big name. They know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's more difficult to just sort of, let that roll off. They're trying to help you. They're trying to give you information that you can build off of. And I have found those to be exceptionally valuable. So I would recommend those to anyone that wants to have their work looked at in a way that, from a lens of someone that's in an industry that uses and works with photographers at a very high level. Because I've attended 3 or 4 over the years, and I have found people have said that there are relationships between bodies of work that I didn't know there were.
Yeah.
And that through line that was there that I was afraid I was wondering and afraid that these two disparate bodies of work were just so different from one another that they were distracting and they were pulling my portfolio down. But in this instance, the reviewers found this through line that they said was actually beneficial. And so that blew me away. And so and I never would have gotten there. I would have never thought about that. And I don't think I would have ever asked anyone. That's the other thing. I don't think I would have asked someone, do these things go together? I just knew they didn't, but I had multiple people say they did. And so that's something that you can build off of and work with and watch out for in the future. So yeah. I can't say enough good things about portfolio review.
Totally agree. If you can get people you trust to give you good, and it's not positive feedback, it's given in a way that is positive, so that you're actually getting, constructive feedback that actually makes sense, tells you where you've gone wrong, whether it's a technical or a compositional or whatever,
right,
choice that you've made. The important thing is taking that away and understanding the way that it's been given and using that then to try and improve.
Right.
In terms of improvement, one of the things that I'm always interested in is experimentation. Do you experiment a lot with either technique out in the field or in the studio? And if so, what sort of things are you experimenting with? And how do you deal with, you mentioned, the images that you look at and you just go, well, that didn't work. How do you deal with that as a learning experience?
Yeah, so experimentation is all I do. I don't think I'm confident in anything. I think every time I go out to shoot is an experiment. I'm a firm believer I use and am committed to full spectrum photography, meaning, my primary camera is the GFX 100 that has had its hot mirror in front of the sensor removed and replaced with a piece of clear glass. Mm-hmm. And what that allows me to do is to put filters in front of the lens, or really anywhere in front of the sensor, that isolate wavelengths of light that the camera is sensitive to, that wouldn't perhaps otherwise be sensitive to if it had that regular mirror in place. So infrared photography, UV photography, combinations of these things along with visible light. And so when I say I go out and I experiment, it is every time I go out and shoot, it depends on the scene, but there was one image in particular. I was in Utah and I had a visible spectrum filter on, it was taking images that, you would see normally, but there was this feature off in the distance and the moon was rising. And so there was this particular butte that I saw and I was like, maybe I'll find a road that takes me there. So I'm on dirt roads and I'm driving my truck around hoping that I come across this thing. And lo and behold, I got super lucky. The road goes right up next to this butte. The moon happened to be rising in exactly the place I would have wanted it to be. Mm. And I was able to remove that UV filter, I was able to remove that visible spectrum filter and put on a deep infrared filter that produces a very high contrast black and white and removes a lot of the scattered light in the sky so that it's very dark. And then what that does is it highlights and creates greater contrast in the moon. And so I was able to, in that moment, pull that filter off, pull the visible off, put the iron filter on, and see what, it was an experiment. I think this is what it's going to look like. Let's look at it and see. And lo and behold, it was what I asked for, is what I wanted. I waited around for some clouds to come over and cast the butte in shadow, except for the very top of the butte, and it kind of opens in a way towards the moon. And I love that image. That's one of my favorite images. And I don't think that image would have been as successful if I didn't have the ability to just experiment quickly by swapping filters and changing the wavelength of light that I was photographing in. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, experimentation, that's just one way, certainly. But I mean, I think about subject matter a lot. I try to think about how the whole reason I had my camera converted to full spectrum was because we were spending a lot of time traveling in the Western states, photographing rocks, photographing the desert. Happy place, love it. But when we moved back to the Southeast, there are a lot of trees, very dense foliage.
Yep.
Not very mountainous. And I'm like, what am I going to photograph? I've been photographing this one particular thing for so long. How do I make this interesting for myself? How do I experiment in a way that keeps me interested? And so that's why I had the camera converted. And so, with infrared, foliage does some really interesting things. And so at least that was a tool that I could use to experiment and to try things and to see how I might be able to make some images that are a bit different. And it has been, not defined, but it has been a huge part of my process ever since. I love that ability to choose what wavelength of light to photograph. And I love being able to play and experiment and see how a subject will photograph in a particular way. Yeah. And so, but also, if like I struggled with, in the Southeast, finding subject matter that said the same thing that the rocks did, that the deserts did. I was interested in this otherworldliness and this rocky world aspect of the landscape that was no longer really a thing in the Southeast. So how can I continue to apply that mindset and that inspiration to this much more closed off, much more forested place that did not naturally lend itself to thinking about nature in this way? And so I used that as a tool to help me get there, just as an example. But experimentation is everything.
Yeah, nice. I guess that sort of leads me into what the practice of photography has actually taught you about nature. How has it changed your relationship with the natural world?
That's a great question too. I think it has, if I'm being totally honest, I mentioned before, I have a very difficult relationship with my work sometimes, and I get very frustrated. Sometimes I run out of ideas. Sometimes I run out of inspiration. And sometimes I wonder if it's worth it, and I can just walk away. I don't have to think about the stress of where we're going to go or how to get a certain image or what an image's life is going to be like after it's shown to the public and whether or not it is successful or not. And all of that, I find it can be quite stressful. And I'm not the best at regulating that emotion. And so I will get pretty dejected at times, just putting it all out there. But what photography does for me is every time that happens, I think about what it would be like being in nature and not photographing it.
Yep.
For me, photographing nature is my relationship to it. That is, you're in nature, you have a relationship to anything that you're walking on grass, you're touching trees. These are things that you have relationships with just by default. But when you're photographing it, you think about it in a way and consider it in a way that is much quieter and it's much deeper and it's much more, again, I can't think of a better verbiage for it than you have a relationship to it. And it's a good relationship because you're listening to it, you're watching it, and you're looking closely at its details, and you can get lost in that moment, and you can get lost in the history that you're looking at. Like when you're looking at rocks that are billions of years old, and you take a moment to consider that. One of my favorite things to photograph is striations in the rock, and it's literally a history book of that particular area and the sediments that have been laid down over millions and billions of years. And that's a powerful thing to be alone in nature and to look at that and to consider all of the things that have lived and died in those striations. And I am hopelessly addicted to that feeling. And so, I could look at that, I could go over and I could touch it, and I can stare at it and appreciate it. But I don't think anything comes close to photographing it and then having that, your version of that interpreted space, that's yours. And that's what I keep coming back to. That's what I've learned. And, being in nature, being in these places, it makes me consider it that much more, that much longer. And I enjoy that feeling. And I enjoy being in awe of the place where we are. And this rock that's floating around, this thermonuclear explosion that's happening constantly. Like, we get to, thinking about it in those terms, I really enjoy. It's a long answer.
So, yeah, that's fantastic though. It's a long but fascinating answer to me. I think you've really explained it very well. In terms of when you've been out for a shoot, are you working straight away on those images, or are you sticking them on hard drives and waiting for days, weeks, months, years to get into them? I mean, everyone ends up with a portfolio of, hard drives that sort of sit there and you come back to and you go, okay, well, I'm going to work on this one from 4 years ago that I know I haven't sort of plumbed the depths of.
Right.
But in terms of from a shoot, are you straight into it, or are you leaving things for a while?
I mean, I can't help but like bring the images in, and you do the backup, right?
Yep.
You put them on your machine, you do a quick look through, and the wiser version of my brain is telling me, don't think about it too much. Just make sure they're there, make sure they're sharp, and put it away.
Yep.
And don't look at it, and don't think about it. And maybe look at it a month, 2 months, 3 months, or more.
Mm-hmm.
And then that will be the way that the images can have their own life, and you let go of the baggage that you had when you photographed them. And if they didn't appear exactly the way that you thought they would, or you wanted them to right away, you're not going to be disappointed. And then, you look at them with fresh eyes. Like I've heard so many people say that, but it's so true.
Yeah.
So the wiser, that's the wisdom. Like that, I think I mean, I'm not going to say that's the wise thing to do. For me, that's the wise thing to do.
Sure.
Do I do that? Rarely. I do it by necessity sometimes, because I'll look at the images that I just photographed and I'm excited to look at them. And I'm like, oh, I think this one's going to be it. Almost always I look at it and I'm just bummed. It didn't come out the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
It didn't come out the way I thought it was going to.
Yeah.
I had this image in mind, this vibe in mind, this feeling that I thought it was going to evoke, and it didn't. And I'm disappointed. And I get down on myself. I'm like, oh, I'm not able to communicate what I want to communicate. I close the laptop and I walk away and I forget about it. And then sometimes it's like months later. It's better when it's like a year later, where you can look at it and you've forgotten all the expectations that you had.
Yeah.
And you can look at it for what it is and realize, like, oh, this has merit. This might actually, it may not say this exact thing, but it definitely is saying something else.
Mm.
And that that has happened to me, I don't know how many times. Some of my favorite images were images that I did not like initially.
Yeah.
And then later on review found that, okay, actually, you know what? Why didn't I start messing with this earlier? Why didn't I include this in this project or this series? Why didn't I do X, Y, or Z?
Mm.
And so, for me, time definitely helps for sure.
Yeah. Awesome.
What do you feel like? Do you feel like you're looking at images right away, or are they?
I'm very much the same. The wiser me says leave it. The practical me says I'm into it. I'm looking. I'm gonna probably do a quick edit on a couple of them and just, okay, yeah, I can work with this, and then try and pack it away. But yeah, quite often it also depends a little bit on where I am and what I'm doing. If I'm away on a trip somewhere, then I know that I've kind of got limited time before I need to move on and those sorts of things. And so sometimes I will do a quick edit and post it, and it'll be kind of about the trip as opposed to about how good that particular image is. And, so it does depend a little bit for me. But yeah, by and large though, yeah, I leave things. I'm digging through things which are, 5, 6 years old now, and just looking for, okay, that's got merit. I can do something with that. And then there's others you look at and go, what was I thinking 5 or 6 years ago?
There's a lot of those for me.
There's a lot of those. Yeah.
Easily most.
Nobody else sees those though. That's
never see those.
It's a good part about being a photographer is that you get to choose what you show people.
But what's funny is I don't delete those images either. I don't know.
No, do I?
I don't know why. I guess I just like taking up hard drive space, but I can't bring myself to delete images.
I'm pretty sure I've got some completely black raw files sitting in folder.
Yes.
Yeah, hoping one day I'll work out a way of actually getting some light into them, but no. I usually delete those if I come across them. But
the technical abilities might one day just you can just throw exposure at it, and there's noise, and it's a masterpiece. You never know.
That's it. One of the things that fascinates me is photography's place in society and different photographers' opinions of that. Where do you see photography in society right now, and where do you see it going?
Man, I struggle with this occasionally because, you always wonder, I say it's easy. I imagine it's easy for photojournalists, for example, to say, photojournalism is extraordinarily important. And now more than ever. Right. I mean, because we're presented with misinformation, disinformation, and on a constant basis. And so we need people with cameras with a set of rules that are followed and we can rely on so that we know what's happening and we know that truth exists.
Yeah.
And so photography and capital P with photojournalism included, extraordinarily important. And again, getting more and more important. I think, when you start going down the list of genres of photography and their place in society, I wonder what the impact of landscape photography is and or fine art photography is. And if it has a great impact, I want to say the answer is that it does, and it has a big impact. And I think it can. I think if we're thinking about certainly the images that are coming back, like we were talking about before from the Artemis mission, those are powerful images that bring people together and encourage a sense of wonder. And I think the world needs that right now. And that exists not on an island. Those images exist in relationship to all of the other images that we're all making. Whether it's on your phone, you're taking pictures of yourself on a vacation, or if you're out making images in the landscape, they all have a relationship to one another. And whether you realize it or not, they feed off of one another.
Yeah.
And so I think photography has a huge social impact, of course, but also is becoming and should become more and more important and impactful because it's real. When you make an image with a camera, lens-based imagery, you're working with reality. You're photographing something that was there. And, we can talk about manipulation and whatever, but, we're starting from there. With AI, artificial intelligence, things that never existed can come into being, but look like they were. And there's not a world that's more dystopian than being fed image after image after image of places that never existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that or of people that never existed, of situations that were never there. And also that you can continue to, I don't know. That's just, that is the most bleak. So I think photography is important for that reason, as well as others. But that is, I need to see people that are real, that places that are real, to be reminded that there is a world that is out there that I can touch and feel.
Yeah.
How quickly could we fall into a black hole of just you want to talk about questioning truth and alternative facts. Well, I mean, we can generate alternative realities at the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
I think this is something that we need to really, I mean, personally, I think we need to push back against and recognize that photography is a way of producing images that have a basis, an anchor point, and a foothold in the real world and in reality. And I think that's right to want.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The thing for me is always, particularly for landscapes and nature photography or cityscapes, street photography, is it's an expression of an experience. And certainly it's something that I know, and most of the people that I've spoken to here on the podcast being saying pretty much the same thing. They're going to continue to do it.
No, yeah.
Whatever else happens in the world, if you can physically get out there and experience something and then bring an image back that shows part of that experience, part of the feeling of being there, that in itself is going to have more intrinsic value than anything that anyone can type into a prompt on a computer and have generated. And so for me, I certainly see that as being one of the things where potentially, and goodness knows where value in photography is going to end up, because it's been a bit all over the shop recently. But I do feel that those personal experiences, the stories that people are telling through their images, is actually going to become more important and therefore more valuable in time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's what I'm hoping is that, we're moving towards so much artificiality. I think we're seeing the pendulum begin to swing in the other direction, where if that's the ubiquity, if AI and artificiality is everywhere, well, then the thing that becomes important is the thing that has the tactility, the physical nature that people have created something themselves. And so this artisanal nature, like artisanal photography, even if it's digital, certainly film has a place in that, a very big one. But even digital photography is an artisanal, having been experienced, having been created by a person. I think that's going to become important. I would like to see that become more important. And so I think that's hopefully a positive that comes out of it.
Definitely. I've only got a few more questions for you. One is, what advice would you give to a 15-year-old Zac?
Don't do it. Just no, I think advice I would give to my younger self would be to not take it so seriously, to have more fun with it, and to not be so worried about failing. If you try not to fail, it's harder to fail. But if you just keep your eye on the thing that you enjoy and the thing that you want, know what you want for starters, but then to keep your eye on that thing that you're after, rather than keeping your eye on not failing or not disappointing the wrong people, or I think I spent a lot of time not at 15 yet, but in my 20s, early 20s, I think I was very preoccupied with not messing up. And I think that can very easily put you in a place where you're always trying to keep your head above water mentally. Whereas if you approach it with more from a relaxed position, from a relaxed mindset, then it's just easier. Everything's easier. you're an easier person to be around. The work that you do has more, the rails are greased essentially, in that way. So that's probably what I would say.
Fantastic. Are there any photographers out there that you think I need to be talking to on the podcast?
I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I had a list prepared, and then I
put it somewhere and can't remember where
it was in my mind and it evaporated. So there are several that I have for you. I am having trouble recalling the names right now.
Okay.
It's so bad. But yeah, there are many, and there are a lot of photographers out there that are specifically in landscape that are making incredible work. It's unique. And Roland Kramer.
Okay. Yeah.
He is I forget, I don't want to say what country he's from because I'll get it wrong, but Roland is making some really, really interesting work. I met him through Behance, if you're familiar with Adobe's social network for artists. Also through that, I met Jan Erik Wader, who is making some fantastic work. And there are others that I would love to send to you. I just don't have the mental bandwidth right now to recall their names, unfortunately.
That's fine. Those three will do fine. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I mean, part of it is also for listeners to go and find these guys and see their work. I'll try and get them on my list and get them to agree to be on the podcast at some point. Sometimes takes me a year or two to get around to people.
I mean, that's great because that means that there's a lot.
That is. Oh, and there certainly is. My last question is one I've asked pretty much everyone on the podcast so far, and I'm keen to hear your opinion. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Yeah. Pineapple belongs on pizza.
Good.
Period. No notes, no further, full stop. Pineapple belongs on pizza.
That's all we need to know. Thanks very much, Zac. It's been absolutely wonderful getting to meet you and learning who you are and how you think. And I've been absolutely fascinated by the conversation today. Thank you so much. Where can people find your work?
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure, absolute honor. It's been fantastic. So I'm on, my website is zachenderson.com, ZACHenderson.com. I'm on Instagram at ZENDRSON. And I have a YouTube channel that I am trying to nurse back from the dead. And that is, I don't even remember my handle on YouTube right now. So that
I'll make sure I find it and I'll include it in the notes. Yeah.
There's a link on my website to the YouTube channel.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Zac.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
Cheers. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on all of the socials except Twitter/X. It just doesn't work for me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because it really helps the podcast to be seen and heard. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.